Richard Morgan stood by the massive glass window of his office on the 40th floor. His hands trembled as he held a small photograph. The picture showed a young boy with bright eyes and a beautiful smile. That boy was his son, Daniel. But that photo was taken 8 years ago, when Daniel was still innocent, still kind, still the son Richard loved with all his heart. Now, everything had changed. The city lights sparkled below like a million diamonds. Richard owned half of those buildings. His company had made him one of the richest men in the country. He had 3 private jets, 5 luxury cars, and a mansion with 27 rooms. People called him a genius, a success story, a man who had everything, but Richard felt empty inside. He looked at his reflection in the dark window. He saw a 52-year-old man in an expensive suit, a man who worked 18 hours every day, a man who missed his son's birthdays, school plays, and football games, a man who gave his child everything except the one thing that mattered most, his time. Richard walked to his desk and sat down heavily in his leather chair. He opened his laptop and watched a video that made his heart sink. It was security footage from last week, filmed outside a restaurant near Daniel's private school. In the video, a homeless man sat on the sidewalk. He was old, maybe 70 years, his clothes were torn and dirty. He held a small cup, hoping someone would drop in a few coins. Then Richard saw his son. Daniel walked out of the restaurant with 3 of his rich friends. They were all wearing designer jackets that cost more than most people earn in a month. They were laughing, carrying expensive shopping bags. The homeless man looked up at them. "Please, sir," the old man said softly. "I haven't eaten in 2 days. Just $1, please." What happened next made Richard's blood run cold. Daniel stopped and looked down at the homeless man. But there was no kindness in his eyes, only disgust. "Get away from me, you smell terrible," Daniel said. His friends laughed. One of them pretended to kick the man's cup. "Maybe if you weren't so lazy, you'd have money," Daniel added. Then he and his friends walked away, still laughing. The old homeless man's face showed such deep sadness. He slowly picked up his cup and moved to another corner. Richard closed his laptop. He felt sick to his stomach. When did his son become so cruel? When did Daniel's heart turn to stone? He remembered Daniel as a little boy. So sweet, so caring. Once, when Daniel was 7, he gave his favorite toy to a poor child at the park. "He needs it more than me, Daddy," little Daniel had said. Where did that beautiful child go? Richard knew the answer. He had failed as a father. He was so busy building his empire that he forgot to build his son's character. He gave Daniel money instead of morals. He gave him things instead of time. He gave him everything except a good example. Now, at 16, Daniel had become everything Richard feared: arrogant, cold, mean to anyone he considered below him. The boy treated waiters rudely. He ignored poor people. He only cared about expensive things and showing off his wealth. Last month, Daniel's school principal called Richard. "Your son bullied a scholarship student," the principal said. "He called the boy too poor to be at our school." Richard had apologized and donated money to the school, but money couldn't fix this problem. Money had created this problem. Richard stood up and walked around his office. He was desperate. He needed to do something dramatic, something that would change Daniel's heart before it was too late. Then, an idea came to him, a crazy idea, a dangerous idea, but maybe the only idea that could work. Richard would disappear. He would leave his mansion, his suits, his luxury life. He would dress as a homeless man. He would live on the streets near Daniel's school. He would see the real Daniel, the Daniel who showed his true character when his father wasn't watching. And maybe, just maybe, he could teach his son the most important lesson of his life. Richard picked up his phone. He called his most trusted assistant, Maria. "I need your help with something," he said, "and you're going to think I'm crazy." 20 minutes later, Maria sat across from Richard, her mouth open in shock. "Sir, you can't be serious," she said. "Living on the streets? It's dangerous. What if someone recognizes you? What if you get hurt?" Richard shook his head. "I've already lost my son, Maria. I can't lose him forever. I need to save him before he becomes a monster." "But sir, this is my final decision," Richard said firmly. "Tomorrow morning, Richard Morgan the billionaire will disappear, and a homeless man will appear near Daniel's school." Maria saw the determination in his eyes. She knew she couldn't change his mind. Richard walked to the window one last time. He looked at the glittering city below. Tomorrow he would lose everything, his comfort, his status, his identity, but maybe he would gain back his son. The question was, what would Daniel do when he saw a homeless man begging for help? Would there be any kindness left in his heart? Or had Richard's son truly become someone beyond saving? Tomorrow, Richard would find out the truth, and that truth would break his heart in ways he never imagined. The clock on Richard's bedroom wall showed 3:47 a.m., but he couldn't sleep. His mind raced with doubts and fear. Was he really going to do this? Was he crazy? Richard sat up in his king-sized bed and looked around his master bedroom. The room was bigger than most people's entire homes. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Expensive paintings covered the walls. Everything screamed wealth and power. By tomorrow night, he would be sleeping on cold concrete. Richard walked to his closet. It was the size of a small apartment. Rows and rows of designer suits hung perfectly. Each suit cost more than a car. He had 200 pairs of shoes, silk ties from Italy, watches worth millions. He grabbed his favorite suit, the navy blue one he wore to important meetings. He held it for a moment, remembering all the powerful deals he had made while wearing it. Then he carried it downstairs to the fireplace. His hands shook as he threw the expensive suit into the flames. The fire consumed it hungrily, $5,000 turning to ash. But Richard didn't care about money anymore. He cared about his son. He threw in another suit, then another, then his expensive ties, his designer shoes. Everything that represented his old life burned. The butler, James, who had worked for Richard for 15 years, stood watching with tears in his eyes. "Sir, please reconsider," James begged. "There must be another way." Richard shook his head. "I've tried everything else, James. I've talked to Daniel. I've punished him. I've sent him to therapists. Nothing works. He needs to learn the hard way." At 5 a.m., Richard left his mansion. But he didn't use the front door. He snuck out through the servant's entrance, like a thief in his own home. Maria was waiting in an old, beaten car, nothing like Richard's usual limousines. "I still think this is insane," she said as Richard got in. "Maybe I am insane," Richard replied. "But sometimes love makes you do crazy things." They drove to the poorest part of the city. The streets were dirty and dangerous, broken windows, graffiti on walls, homeless people sleeping in doorways. Richard had built shopping malls and luxury apartments all over the city, but he had never actually been to this neighborhood. Maria stopped the car outside a rundown thrift store. "I bought everything you asked for," she said quietly. She handed Richard a plastic bag. Inside the bag were clothes that smelled of sweat and dirt, a torn gray jacket with holes in the elbows, pants with stains that would never wash out, a shirt that used to be white but was now yellow and brown, shoes with broken soles held together with duct tape. Richard went into a dark alley to change. He took off his expensive watch, his gold rings, his silk boxer shorts, everything that showed who he really was. He put on the homeless man's clothes. They felt rough against his skin. They smelled terrible. He wanted to throw up, but he kept going. Maria had also bought him a hat. Not a fancy hat, but a dirty baseball cap with holes, and a pair of broken glasses to help disguise his face. When Richard came out of the alley, Maria gasped. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I don't even recognize you." Richard looked at himself in the car's side mirror. The man staring back looked 70 years old, broken, tired, defeated. His hair was messy. His face was dirty. His clothes hung on his body like rags. "Perfect," Richard said softly. Maria gave him a small backpack. Inside was a thin blanket that had more holes than fabric, a cardboard sign she had made with shaky writing, "Hungry? Please help," and a plastic cup for collecting coins. "I put a secret phone in the bottom of the backpack," Maria said. "If anything goes wrong, if you're in danger, call me immediately. I'll have security there in 3 minutes." Richard nodded. His throat felt tight with emotion. "How long will you do this?" Maria asked. "Until Daniel shows me who he really is," Richard answered. "1 week, maybe 2, however long it takes." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Please be careful, sir. The streets are dangerous. People get hurt. People die." "I know," Richard said. "But my son's soul is dying, I have to save him." They drove in silence to the street 3 blocks from Daniel's expensive private school. It was 6:30 a.m. The sun was just starting to rise. Richard got out of the car, he took his cardboard sign and his cup. He found a spot on the sidewalk, right where students would walk past on their way to school. The concrete was cold and hard. Richard had never sat on the ground like this. He always sat in leather chairs, in first-class airplane seats, in luxury cars. Now he sat on dirty pavement, and it hurt. Maria drove away slowly. Richard watched the old car disappear around the corner. He was alone now, completely alone. People started walking past. Men in business suits rushed to work. Women in high heels hurried by. Nobody looked at him, it was like he didn't exist. A man in an expensive coat walked directly toward Richard. For a moment, Richard thought the man would help. But the man stepped over Richard's legs without even glancing down. Like Richard was just garbage on the sidewalk. Richard felt something he had never felt before. Invisibility, shame, worthlessness. Is this how homeless people feel every day? At 7:45 a.m., Richard heard the sound he was waiting for. Expensive cars pulling up to the school, doors opening, rich teenagers laughing and talking. His heart started beating faster. Then he saw it, the black Mercedes, his Mercedes, the one he bought for Daniel's 16th birthday. The car stopped, the door opened, and Daniel stepped out. Richard's son looked so handsome, so confident, so successful. He wore a designer jacket, expensive sneakers, a gold chain around his neck. Daniel laughed with his friends. They all looked the same, rich, spoiled, untouchable. They started walking toward the school. They were walking straight toward Richard. Richard pulled his dirty hat down lower. His hands shook. His heart pounded so loud he thought everyone could hear it. This was it, the moment of truth. Would his son show any kindness to a stranger in need? Or would Richard's worst fears come true? Richard's heart hammered in his chest like a drum. He could hear Daniel's voice getting closer, laughing about something with his friends. The sound that used to bring Richard joy now filled him with dread. "Bro, did you see the new Ferrari my dad's buying me for graduation?" One of Daniel's friends said loudly. "That's nothing," another boy bragged. "My father just bought me a penthouse apartment. I don't even have to live with my parents anymore." They were only 20 feet away now. Richard could smell their expensive cologne, the kind that costs $300 a bottle, the same cologne Richard used to wear. He pulled his dirty blanket tighter around his shoulders. His whole body trembled, not from cold, but from fear. What if Daniel recognized him? What if this whole plan failed? 15 feet away, Richard lowered his head and extended his shaking hand. The hand that used to sign million-dollar contracts now begged for coins. His voice came out weak and broken. "Please, sir, anything helps. I haven't eaten in 2 days." The group of boys stopped walking. Richard kept his eyes on the ground. He could see their expensive shoes, Daniel's limited edition sneakers that cost $1,200. Shoes that could feed a family for a month. "Oh great, another beggar," one of Daniel's friends said with disgust. Richard's hand stayed extended, waiting, hoping, praying that his son would show even a tiny bit of kindness. Then Daniel spoke, and Richard's world stopped. "Dude, why do these people always sit near our school?" Daniel's voice was cold, annoyed, like he was talking about trash on the sidewalk. "Get a job, loser," another boy added. But Daniel wasn't done. Richard heard his son step closer. He could see Daniel's shadow falling over him. "You know what your problem is, old man?" Daniel said. His voice dripped with cruelty. "You're lazy. You want everything handed to you. Real men work for their money." The words stabbed Richard's heart like knives. His own son, his own flesh and blood, speaking to him with such hatred. Richard dared to look up, just a little. He saw Daniel's face, so young, so handsome, but so cold. There was no warmth in those eyes, no compassion, no humanity. "Please," Richard whispered, his voice cracking with real emotion. "Just $1 for food." Daniel laughed, actually laughed. "You want to know what I think?" Daniel said to his friends, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I think the government should clear these people off the streets. They make our city look ugly." His friends laughed and agreed. Then it happened. One of Daniel's friends, a tall boy with blonde hair, kicked Richard's plastic cup. The few coins inside scattered across the sidewalk, rolling into the gutter, disappearing. The boys laughed louder. Richard wanted to scream. He wanted to stand up and grab Daniel by the shoulders. He wanted to yell, "I'm your father. How can you be so cruel?" But he stayed silent. He stayed down on the ground, playing his role. "Come on, guys," Daniel said. "We're gonna be late for class, and I don't want to smell like this homeless dude all day." They walked away, their laughter echoing down the street. Richard sat frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. Tears rolled down his dirty cheeks. This was worse than he imagined. Much worse. Daniel wasn't just ignoring homeless people. He was actively cruel to them. He enjoyed their suffering. An old woman walking her dog stopped nearby. She had seen everything. "Are you okay, dear?" she asked Richard gently. She reached into her purse and pulled out a $5 bill. "Here, get yourself something to eat." Richard looked up at her. This stranger, this woman who probably didn't have much money herself, showed more kindness than his own son. "Thank you," Richard whispered, his voice breaking. "God bless you," the woman said, and continued walking. Richard picked up his scattered coins from the gutter. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold them. He counted. 73 cents, that's all he had. The morning sun grew brighter. More people walked past, businessmen, students, mothers with children. Some ignored Richard completely. Some gave him disgusted looks. A few kind souls dropped coins in his cup. But Richard barely noticed. His mind was stuck on Daniel, on the cruelty in his son's voice, on the total lack of empathy. Around noon, Richard saw something that made his situation even worse. A security guard from a nearby store walked toward him. "You can't sit here," the guard said roughly. "You're bad for business. Move along." "Please," Richard said. "I'm not bothering anyone." "I said move," the guard shouted. He grabbed Richard's arm and pulled him up. Richard's body ached. He hadn't eaten anything since yesterday. He was weak. The guard pushed him, and Richard stumbled, almost falling. "If I see you here again, I'm calling the police," the guard threatened. Richard gathered his blanket and cup and moved to another spot, further down the street, but still where he could see the school. He sat down on the cold concrete again, his back against a brick wall. His whole body hurt, but nothing hurt as much as his heart. He thought about giving up. Maybe this experiment was a mistake. Maybe Daniel was too far gone. Maybe some people just couldn't be saved. But then Richard remembered something. A memory from 10 years ago. Daniel was only 6 years old. They were at a park. A little girl had fallen and scraped her knee. Little Daniel had run over immediately. "Are you okay?" he asked. He gave the girl his ice cream to make her feel better. That kind boy was still inside Daniel somewhere. He had to be. Richard decided to stay, not for one day, not for 1 week, but for as long as it took. He would find that kind boy again, or he would die trying. As the afternoon sun began to set, Richard saw the school doors open. Students poured out, laughing, talking, excited to go home. He saw Daniel again, getting into the black Mercedes. Daniel glanced in Richard's direction for just a moment. Their eyes almost met, but Daniel looked away quickly, like Richard was invisible. The car drove off, leaving Richard alone on the cold street. Day 1 was over, and Richard's heart was already broken into 1,000 pieces. But this was only the beginning. The worst was still to come. Day 3 on the streets, and Richard felt like a different person. His expensive life seemed like a distant dream now, a dream from another world. A world he no longer belonged to. His body ached everywhere. Sleeping on cardboard boxes had bruised his back and shoulders. His stomach growled constantly. He had eaten only twice in 3 days. A sandwich from a kind stranger. Some leftover pizza someone threw in the trash. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional torture. Every morning, Daniel walked past him. Every afternoon, Daniel walked past him again. And every single time, his son looked through him like he was invisible, like he was less than human. Richard had stopped trying to speak to Daniel. What was the point? The boy who used to be his son was gone. On the morning of day 4, something happened that pushed Richard to his absolute limit. It was raining. Not a gentle rain, but a heavy, cold rain that soaked through Richard's thin blanket in seconds. He had no umbrella, no jacket, no protection. He sat shivering against the wall, water dripping from his hair, his teeth chattering, his fingers turning blue from cold. Expensive cars pulled up to drop off students. All the teenagers had umbrellas. They ran quickly from their cars to the school building, trying not to get wet. Then Richard saw the black Mercedes. Daniel stepped out, holding a large golf umbrella. He wore a waterproof designer jacket that probably cost $2,000. He was completely dry, completely comfortable. A younger student, maybe 13 years old, ran past Daniel. The boy slipped on the wet pavement and fell hard. His backpack flew open, books and papers scattered everywhere. Getting soaked by the rain, the young boy looked like he might cry. He scrambled to gather his ruined homework. Daniel stood there, dry under his big umbrella, watching. Richard held his breath, waiting, hoping, praying that Daniel would help. "Please," Richard whispered to himself. "Please, son, show me you still have a heart." For a moment, Daniel hesitated. He took one step toward the fallen boy. Richard's heart lifted with hope. But then Daniel stopped. He looked at his expensive watch. "I'm gonna be late," Daniel muttered. He walked around the boy, careful not to step in the puddles, and went into the school. The young boy gathered his wet books alone, crying. Something inside Richard shattered. He had seen enough. His son was beyond hope, beyond saving. This experiment was pointless. Richard decided. This would be his last day. Tonight he would go home. He would give up on Daniel, maybe send him to military school or boarding school in another country, anywhere far away. The rain continued all day. Richard sat in it, not caring anymore. He was already broken. What difference did a little more suffering make? By afternoon, he was completely soaked. His whole body shook from cold. An old homeless woman named Betty, who often sat 2 blocks away, came to check on him. "Honey, you need to find shelter," Betty said, concerned. She was 70 years old and had been homeless for 5 years. "This rain will make you sick?" "I don't care," Richard said numbly. "Don't talk like that," Betty said gently. "Here, take my extra blanket." She handed Richard a blanket that was barely better than his own, but she gave it willingly, even though she had almost nothing. Richard looked at this woman. She lived in poverty. She owned nothing, yet she showed more kindness than his millionaire son. Tears mixed with rain on Richard's face. Betty sat down beside him, sharing what little shelter the wall provided. "You're new to the streets," she observed. "I can tell." "How?" Richard asked. "You still have hope in your eyes," Betty said sadly. "Most of us lost that a long time ago." They sat together in silence. 2 human beings society had forgotten. Around 3 p.m., the school bell rang. Students poured out, running to their cars, desperate to escape the rain. Richard saw Daniel come out with his friends. They were laughing about something, completely dry under their expensive umbrellas. As Daniel walked past, something fell from his pocket, a leather wallet. It hit the wet pavement with a splash. Daniel didn't notice. He kept walking, laughing, talking. Richard stared at the wallet. He could see it was expensive, probably Italian leather, probably full of credit cards and cash. Betty saw it too. "That's a nice wallet," she said quietly. Richard's hand reached out. He could grab it. Daniel deserved to lose it. Karma for being so cruel. But Richard stopped himself. Then something unexpected happened. A small girl, maybe 8 years old, was walking with her mother. The little girl saw the wallet. She picked it up and shouted, "Excuse me, sir. You dropped something." Daniel turned around. The little girl ran to him, holding out the wallet. Her own coat was getting soaked, but she didn't care. Daniel took the wallet. He checked inside quickly, making sure all his money and cards were still there. The little girl smiled, waiting. Richard knew what she was waiting for. A thank you, maybe a small reward for her honesty. Daniel looked at the girl. Then he looked at her mother. They were clearly not wealthy. The mother's coat was old and worn. The girl's shoes had holes. "Thanks," Daniel said flatly. Then he turned and walked away. No reward, no real gratitude, nothing. The little girl's smile faded. She looked confused, hurt. Her mother put a hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing, baby," the mother said gently. "That's what matters." They walked away. The little girl kept looking back, still confused why the rich boy hadn't been nicer. Richard felt something break inside him. Not break with sadness this time. Break with rage. He had created a monster. His son had everything but had learned nothing. Daniel took kindness for granted. He expected the world to serve him. Betty touched Richard's arm. "You okay, friend?" "No," Richard said honestly. "I'm not okay at all." The rain poured harder. Richard sat there, drowning in his failure as a father. He had lost his son to greed, to privilege, to a world where money mattered more than humanity. As the afternoon turned to evening, the street grew quieter. Richard's phone buzzed in his hidden backpack. It was Maria. "Sir, please come home. You've been out there for 4 days. You've proven your point." But what point had he proven? That his son was cruel? He already knew that. Richard turned off the phone. He decided to stay one more day, just one more. Tomorrow was Friday, the last day of the school week. If Daniel showed no kindness by tomorrow, Richard would accept the truth. His son was lost forever. The rain finally stopped as night fell. Richard wrapped himself in Betty's extra blanket. "Thank you for your kindness," he told her. "That's what we do out here," Betty said with a sad smile. "We take care of each other because nobody else will." Richard closed his eyes, his body exhausted, his heart shattered. Tomorrow would be the final test. Tomorrow would decide everything. But Richard had no idea that tomorrow would bring something he never expected. Something that would change everything. Tomorrow, his son would do something that would break his heart in a completely different way. A way he never saw coming. Friday morning arrived with a strange silence. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray and heavy. Richard woke up on the cold sidewalk, his entire body stiff and aching. He had barely slept. Nightmares haunted him all night. Dreams of Daniel growing older, colder, harder. Dreams of his son becoming a man without a soul. Betty was already awake. She shared half of a stale donut with Richard. "Last day?" she asked quietly. "Last day," Richard confirmed. His voice was hoarse and broken. "Whatever you're looking for out here," Betty said wisely, "I hope you find it." Richard nodded, but he had already given up hope. The morning started like all the others, people walking past, ignoring him, a few kind souls dropping coins in his cup, most treating him like he was invisible. Then the expensive cars started arriving at the school. Richard positioned himself in his usual spot. He didn't even bother holding out his hand anymore. What was the point? The black Mercedes pulled up. Daniel stepped out, wearing a fresh designer outfit, looking perfect, looking untouchable. He walked toward the school with his friends. As always, they passed Richard without a glance. Richard felt nothing. He was numb now, beyond pain, beyond disappointment. The morning passed slowly. Richard sat in silence, watching people, watching life happen around him while he remained invisible. Around noon, something different happened. 3 teenage boys appeared. They weren't from Daniel's private school. Richard could tell immediately. They wore gang colors. Their faces were hard, dangerous. They walked straight toward Richard. "Hey, old man," the biggest one said. He had a scar across his cheek. "This is our corner." Richard looked up, confused. "I don't understand." "This corner belongs to us?" another boy said. "People who give money here. That money is ours, you're stealing from us." Betty, who was sitting nearby, quickly gathered her things. "Don't argue with them," she whispered to Richard. "Just move." But before Richard could stand up, the scarred boy grabbed his blanket and ripped it away. "Hey!" Richard protested. That blanket was his only protection against the cold. "Oh, the old man wants to fight?" The third boy laughed. A small crowd started forming. People stopped to watch, but nobody helped. They just stood at a safe distance, watching like it was entertainment. The scarred boy kicked Richard's cup. The coins he had collected all morning scattered everywhere. "Please," Richard said. I'll move. Just let me gather my things. Too late for that, the boy said. He shoved Richard hard. Richard fell backward. His head hit the brick wall. Pain exploded through his skull. He saw stars. Betty screamed, "Leave him alone. He's just an old man." One of the boys pushed Betty too. She fell to the ground. The scarred boy stood over Richard. "Maybe we should teach you a lesson." He pulled back his fist. Richard closed his eyes, waiting for the punch. Then, a voice cut through the air like a knife. "Stop!" Richard's eyes flew open. Time seemed to freeze. The voice, he knew that voice. The crowd parted. Someone was running toward them. Richard's heart stopped. It was Daniel. His son was running, actually running, his expensive shoes splashing through puddles, his perfect hair flying. "I said stop," Daniel shouted again, his voice shaking with anger. The three boys turned around, surprised. "What's your problem, rich boy?" the scarred one asked. Daniel stopped right in front of them. Breathing hard, he was smaller than them, younger, but he didn't back down. "Leave him alone," Daniel said, his fists clenched. The boys laughed. "Or what?" Richard tried to speak. "Son." Then he caught himself. "Young man, just go. I'll be fine." But Daniel didn't move. He stood his ground. "This doesn't concern you," the scarred boy said, stepping closer to Daniel. "Walk away before you get hurt." Daniel's hands were shaking. Richard could see fear in his son's eyes. But Daniel didn't run. "I'm not going anywhere," Daniel said. The crowd grew larger. Students from the private school gathered. They whispered to each other, shocked. Nobody had ever seen Daniel defend anyone before. "Daniel, what are you doing?" One of his friends called out. "Let's just go." But Daniel ignored them. The scarred boy pushed Daniel's chest. "Last warning, rich boy." What happened next shocked everyone. Daniel reached into his pocket. He pulled out his wallet. The expensive leather wallet the little girl had returned yesterday. He opened it and took out all the cash inside, at least $300. "Here," Daniel said, holding out the money with a shaking hand. "Take this and leave him alone." The boys looked at the money, greedy. "Please," Daniel added, his voice cracking, "just take it and go." The scarred boy snatched the money. He counted it quickly, then smiled. "Pleasure doing business with you, rich boy." The three boys laughed and walked away, counting the cash. The crowd slowly dispersed. Disappointed the fight was over. Daniel's friends stood in shock. "Dude, why did you do that?" one of them asked. Daniel didn't answer them. He turned to Richard. Their eyes met. For the first time in 4 days, Daniel really looked at Richard. Not through him, not past him, but at him, seeing him as a human being. "Sir, are you okay?" Daniel asked, his voice gentle now. He knelt down beside Richard, his expensive pants touching the dirty, wet ground. Richard's throat tightened. He couldn't speak. Daniel helped Betty stand up first. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" Betty shook her head, tears in her eyes. "Bless you, child," she whispered. Then Daniel turned back to Richard. He extended his hand, offering to help him up. Richard stared at that hand, the same hand that had ignored him for 4 days. "Please, let me help you," Daniel said. Richard took his son's hand. Daniel pulled him up gently, carefully, like Richard was fragile. "Are you hurt?" Daniel asked, examining Richard's face. "You hit your head pretty hard. Maybe we should call an ambulance." "No," Richard managed to say. "I'm okay." Daniel picked up Richard's scattered belongings, the blanket, the cup, the few coins that remained. "Here," Daniel said, handing them back. Richard's hands trembled as he took them. Daniel's friends were calling him. "Daniel, come on. We're going to be late." But Daniel didn't move. He stayed with Richard. "Are you sure you're okay?" Daniel asked again, real concern in his eyes. Richard nodded, unable to trust his voice. Daniel reached into his pocket again. He only had $20 left. He gave it all to Richard. "Please, get yourself some food," Daniel said. "And maybe find a shelter tonight. It's supposed to rain again." Richard took the money, his vision blurred with tears. Thank you, Richard whispered. Daniel smiled, a real, genuine smile. My father taught me something when I was young, Daniel said softly. Richard's heart stopped. He told me that every person deserves dignity, Daniel continued, his own eyes getting watery. That every person matters. He said the measure of a man isn't his bank account. It's how he treats people who can do nothing for him. A tear rolled down Daniel's cheek. But I forgot that lesson. Daniel's voice broke. I became everything my father would hate. I treated people like you terribly, and I'm so sorry. Richard couldn't hold back anymore. Tears streamed down his face. The worst part is, Daniel continued, now crying openly, I lost my dad, not to death, but to his work. He's so busy making money that he forgot I exist. So I became angry. I became cruel, just like the world that took him from me. Daniel wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Maybe if I had my father back, Daniel whispered. Maybe I could be good again. Those words destroyed Richard. Completely, utterly, destroyed him. Richard stood frozen, his son's words echoing in his mind like thunder. Maybe if I had my father back, maybe I could be good again. Everything Richard thought he knew shattered in that moment. He believed Daniel had become cruel because he was spoiled, because he had too much money, too much privilege. But the truth was far more painful. Daniel became cruel because he was abandoned by the one person who mattered most. I'm sorry, Daniel said again, wiping his tears. I don't know why I'm telling you this. You're a stranger. He laughed sadly. But you're the first person who's felt real to me in a long time. Richard's heart was breaking into smaller and smaller pieces. Betty stood nearby, quietly crying. She understood something the two men didn't yet realize. Your father, Richard managed to say, his voice shaking. I'm sure he loves you. Daniel shook his head. Love? He doesn't even know me anymore. Daniel sat down on the wet sidewalk next to Richard. When I was little, he was my hero. We used to play soccer in the backyard. He taught me how to ride a bike. He read me stories every night. Richard remembered those days. They felt like a lifetime ago. Then his company started growing. Daniel continued, staring at his hands. First he missed one bedtime story, then a few soccer games, then my birthday, then everything. Daniel's voice was hollow. By the time I turned 13, I only saw him at breakfast, and even then, he was on his phone, making deals, checking stocks. Each word was a knife in Richard's chest. I tried everything to get his attention, Daniel said. I got straight A's, he didn't notice. I made the varsity team, he was too busy to come to games. I even got in trouble at school once, just to see if he'd care. Daniel laughed bitterly. He just threw money at the problem and went back to work. Richard wanted to scream, he wanted to grab his son and tell him the truth. But he stayed silent, listening. So I stopped trying, Daniel said. I became what everyone expected. A rich, spoiled kid. Empty, heartless. He looked at Richard with desperate eyes. But I hate who I've become. I hate looking in the mirror. Then why? Richard started. Why do I keep acting that way? Daniel finished. Because if I stop, if I let myself feel again, I'll have to face how much it hurts, how much I miss my dad, how alone I really am. The morning sun broke through the clouds for a moment. Light fell on both their faces. Money doesn't fill the hole, Daniel whispered. I have everything, expensive clothes, fancy cars, unlimited credit cards, but I'd give it all away, every single dollar, for one day with my father, the father who used to care, the father who used to see me. Richard couldn't breathe, the pain was too much. You know what the worst part is? Daniel asked. I'm becoming just like him, cold, distant, caring only about money and status. In 10 years, I'll probably have my own son, and I'll ignore him the same way. No, Richard said suddenly, urgently. Don't say that. Daniel looked at him, surprised. You're not your father, Richard said, his voice intense. You just proved that. You stood up to those boys, you helped me, you helped this woman. He gestured to Betty. That's not heartless, that's not empty. But I've been so cruel, Daniel said. To you, to others like you. Just yesterday I walked past a kid who fell in the rain. I didn't help him, but today you helped. Richard said, tears flowing freely now. Today you chose differently, that's what matters. Is it enough? Daniel asked desperately. Can one good action erase 100 bad ones? No, Richard said honestly. But it's a start. Every journey back to goodness starts with a single step. Daniel wiped his eyes. My father used to say something like that. Richard's hands trembled. He reached up and started to remove his dirty hat. This was it, the moment of truth. But before he could reveal himself, Betty spoke up. Young man, she said gently to Daniel. Can I tell you something an old woman has learned? Daniel nodded. The people we love hurt us the most, Betty said. Not because they're cruel, but because we care so deeply. Your father, maybe he's lost too. Maybe he's so busy trying to build you a future that he forgot to be part of your present. Daniel listened, really listened. And you, Betty continued. You're so busy being angry that you're hurting innocent people. You're punishing strangers for your father's mistakes. The truth of her words hit Daniel like a punch. What do I do? Daniel asked, his voice small, like a child's. Talk to him, Betty said simply. Tell your father how you feel. Really talk. Not with anger, but with honesty. Tell him you need him. What if he doesn't care? Daniel's voice broke. What if he does? Betty countered. What if he's waiting for the same thing? What if you're both lost, waiting for the other to reach out first? Daniel looked down, processing this. Richard couldn't wait any longer. His heart was too full, too broken, too desperate. He reached up with shaking hands and pulled off his dirty hat. His fingers moved to remove the broken glasses. Sometimes the people we're looking for, Richard said softly, are closer than we think. Daniel wasn't paying attention. He was lost in thought about Betty's words. I should talk to him, Daniel said, more to himself than anyone. Tonight, I'll wait for him to come home. I'll tell him everything, even if he's too busy to listen, at least I'll have tried. Richard removed the glasses. What if? Richard started, his voice now clear, undisguised. Daniel's head snapped up. He looked at Richard's face. Really looked. The color drained from Daniel's skin. His eyes went wide. His mouth fell open. What? Daniel whispered. Dad. The word hung in the air between them. Richard nodded, tears streaming down his dirty face. Dad. Daniel said again, louder, confused, shocked, devastated. He scrambled backward, staring at Richard like he was seeing a ghost. Is this real? Daniel's voice shook. Am I going crazy? It's me, son, Richard said, his voice breaking. It's really me. Daniel looked at the dirty clothes, the homeless appearance, the 4 days of suffering written on his father's face. I don't understand, Daniel said, his breathing rapid, panicked. Why? Why would you? Because I lost you, Richard said simply. And I needed to find you again. Daniel's face went through 1,000 emotions. Shock, confusion, anger, pain, understanding. Finally, he started to cry, not quiet tears, but deep, soul-breaking sobs. You were here, Daniel cried. All week, you were here watching me. Richard nodded. You saw everything? Daniel continued, horror dawning on his face. You saw how cruel I was. You heard what I said. Yes, Richard whispered. Oh God. Daniel put his face in his hands. Oh God, what have I become? Richard moved closer to his son. You became lost, Richard said gently. Just like me, we both got lost. Daniel looked up, his face destroyed by tears. I'm so sorry, Daniel sobbed. I'm so sorry, Dad. I didn't know it was you. But that doesn't make it better. I was horrible to you, to everyone. Richard reached out and pulled his son into his arms. Daniel collapsed against his father's chest, crying like he hadn't cried since he was a little boy. I'm sorry too, Richard whispered, holding his son tight. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I chose work over you. I'm sorry I let you become so angry and lost. They sat on that dirty sidewalk, father and son, both broken, both crying, both holding each other like they were drowning. Betty watched them, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. She quietly gathered her things and walked away, giving them privacy.